Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for the next in our GAP webinar series, Slope Rating Explained. My name is Jason Funderburg. I'm going to be moderating and asking some questions of our panel here. I'm joined by the entire Member Services Department. Mario Mackey, Director of Member Services, and Steve Latos, Manager of GIN Technical Support, are going to be going through some questions, answering those that we can't ask in the presentation today. I'm also joined by John Manos, GAP's Director of Course Rating, as well as Scott Hovde from the USGA. He is the Director of Course Rating and Handicap Research. Just a reminder before we get started, folks, today's session is being recorded and will be posted on our website, gapgolf.org/gap-webinars. We're going to have that up on the screen at the end. And we encourage any questions that you have in the window pane of the GoToWebinar. You'll see a questions tab. Feel free to submit them to us, and we will have a couple stops along the way to answer some of those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to John Manos. John, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jason. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation. As Jason said, we are going to go through slope rating explained a little bit more. This is a continuation of the webinars we've been doing for the last couple weeks. We have touched on several different points of the World Handicap System, and the course rating system obviously ties into that. That presentation was really well received, but one of the questions we kept getting over and over again, and people asked for further clarification, was in the area of slope rating. So we figured this would be a great time to kind of dive a little bit deeper, borrow some of Scott's expertise, and kind of talk a little bit more about slope rating. So let's get into the presentation. Today, we're going to talk about 4 key topics. What is slope rating? How is it used? How is it determined? And then talk a little bit about the history of slope rating, where it came from, all that kind of good stuff. So to get started, the technical book definition of slope rating is an indication of the relative difficulty of a golf course for players who are not scratch golfers compared to players who are scratch golfers. The lowest slope rating is 55 and the highest slope rating is 155. A lot of words there. We're going to dive a little more into that, what slope rating really means, a more practical definition, but that is the book definition of slope rating. So, question here, which is the more difficult golf course? We're comparing 2 courses here, Bell Springs Golf Club in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania. From the blue tees, it plays about 6,800 yards, has a course rating of 72.4, a slope rating of 118. And then Broad Run Golfers Club in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Again, the blue tees played just shy of 6,400 yards, has a course rating of 71.5 and a slope rating of 137. Most golfers would make the assumption, since that slope rating is considerably higher, that is the more difficult golf course. But I'm going to bring Scott in here real quick. Scott, which is the more difficult golf course there?
Yeah, so we'll actually answer this later in a graph form, but one thing about course rating is there's no one size fits all. It's you can't say for sure. This is almost a trick question because you can't say for sure which golf course is more difficult. You have to know the player you're referring to. So, you know, for a low handicap player, one course may be slightly more difficult than it is for a higher handicap player on the same golf course. So it really depends on the player, and we'll kind of show that in a graph form a little bit later of how the system is kind of designed to work.
Perfect. So moving forward, we're going to look here at some of the highest slope ratings in GAP. We can see this list here. We have 2 sets of tees for men, one at Pine Valley Golf Club, one at Ledge Rock Golf Club, that have a slope rating of 155. Again, that's the maximum slope rating there can be. See some other difficult ones there. And then for women below, Commonwealth National from the green tees has a slope rating of 155. We can see Marion, the Ace Club, and Galloway, which all have pretty high slope ratings. One thing to note for women there that might be a little bit misleading, not all clubs have middle tees rated for women. So we might see some other golf courses that would have high slopes if they did exist. But these aren't your everyday slope ratings. These aren't ones that we're seeing day in and day out, and they're not being used to calculate your handicaps all the time. These are some of those clubs you're going to see once in a while, the highest slope ratings possible. Diving into some other slope ratings, here are maybe 4 more practical golf courses that people on this presentation play day in and day out. We see slope ratings there in the mid 120s to the low 130s. The important thing to note is the national average for slope rating is 125. People think it's 113. That's a number that's used all the time in the handicap system, but 125 is about the actual national average right now. So Jason, do we have any questions at this point?
Just one so far. Again, everyone, encourage questions. We're more than happy to answer anything you have. So first question here is, were there any major changes to slope rating with the transition to the World Handicap System?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So we did consider changing the system due to the change in the handicap formula for the World Handicap System. As everybody probably knows, it's now best 8 of 20 differential average, as opposed to the old USJ system, which was a 10 of 20 average with a 96% multiplier. It would have been a lot of work to retool the entire system for a small change in the handicap, the expected handicap, as 8 of 20 is actually a fairly similar number as 10 of 20 with a 96% value for the players that we're talking about in the course rating system, scratch bogey. So it really wasn't worth the effort to try to retool the whole system. These are just standards. These are not, these are not something that they obviously don't change from year to year. They're standards. So we didn't feel like there was enough reason to make a change to the course rating system, especially with slope, for the change in the World Handicap System. The other thing is that this has been used worldwide. The USJ course rating system was used worldwide for probably the last 25 years in many different handicap systems, not just in the USGA handicap system, but in European Golf Association, South Africa, and so forth. So it has been used in handicap systems that don't use a better half average system like we had. So, and it worked well. So we had some pretty good confidence that it would work well with the transition over to the World Handicap System.
Great. Got a couple rolling in here. Got the ball rolling with that first question. How can the length of a course be the dominant factor in the slope rating of a course? The other factors seem to be given minimal consideration. How does a course with a shorter length end up with a much higher rating?
Well, length is the number one factor for both course rating and slope rating, due to it's the one thing that a golfer has to deal with. They have to get the ball from the tee to the hole. The longer the hole is, in general, the higher the scoring average would be. Obviously, obstacles, bunkers, penalty areas, etc. Those all add, difficulty as well, but none of them add nearly the difficulty of just lengthening the hole. So, but slope rating actually isn't impacted as much by length as course rating, because, for a bogey golfer, the obstacles actually have a much bigger factor on the bogey rating, which is kind of what drives the slope rating in general, because course rating is going to be pretty consistent. It's probably plus or minus about 1 to 2 strokes based on length, but the bogey rating could be plus or minus 8, 9, 10 strokes from length. So it does have a much bigger factor for the bogey golfer, and then slope as well. Do you want to add anything to that, John?
No, that's perfect.
And it looks like we got one last question for this section, then we can head on forward in our presentation. Is that 125 average for men and women?
Yeah, that's the overall average, about 125. What we've seen in the last few years is a big increase in the number of tees rated for women, which is good. There's a lot of women that can play some of the longer tees and should be rated for them. So, most of those tee ratings are going to be pretty high slope ratings from some of the longer sets of tees. Men also do move forward and play the forward tees as well, but those have tended to be rated, for many, many years, decades sometimes. So, the average has kind of gone up over the last 5 or 6 years just due to the influx of more women's ratings that have kind of boosted that average up a little bit. But prior to that, maybe 6 years ago, it was about 122. So it's moved up about 3 points, but it also includes new courses and courses that have shut down and so forth. And also, there's a lot of hybrid tees out there. If you guys don't know what those are, essentially composite tees where you play a mixture of different tees on a golf course, maybe nine holes from the whites, 9 holes from the blues, and maybe every other hole you're swapping. Those all get factored in as well, and they tend to do those more in the higher end range as opposed to the lower end range. So that also kind of drives up the average a little bit.
Perfect. Set it for questions, Jason?
Yep, that's all we got for now. But I'm sure we'll have some more roll in by the time we get to that next question slide.
Cool. So we're going to keep moving forward here. So getting back to the 4 main talking points today, we're going to dive into these questions. What is slope rating? How is it used? How is it determined? And talk about the history of slope rating a little bit. So Scott, what is slope rating? We read that book definition before, but what is a real life definition of slope rating?
Yeah, so slope, as anybody here who took math back in their school days knows, that slope is just a mathematical term, rise over run. So it's how much a line goes up, ratio versus how much it goes lateral. So as you can see in this image here, this isn't a perfect slope. Obviously, normally a slope is a smooth line, but this is kind of stepped because there's rounded scores involved. If you're talking about a player between a 0 and a 0.9 handicap index, they might all have the same exact expected score. So that's kind of why you see those numbers or the line kind of stepping up as opposed to a smooth line. But essentially, if you look on the left, these are the 2 courses we had in our example earlier, the question about which course is more difficult. So Bell Springs, as you can see, which is represented by the green line, the scores as handicap goes up, handicap index goes up, their expected scores go up at it was a 118 slope rating, goes up essentially at 118 over 113. The 113 is the standard, so we divide those 2 numbers, and essentially it's only going up a little bit more than the handicap index itself. So somebody who's a 0 handicap index isn't affected by slope, obviously, but somebody who's a 10 index on this particular course, they may shoot 11 over the course rating, because that score is going up slightly faster than the handicap index is. On broad run, which has a much higher slope rating, those scores are going up a little quicker relative to handicap index. So that yellow line actually, as you see, kind of crosses over at about the 5.7 range in the chart, and that number then becomes higher because as the handicap index goes up, scores are actually going up faster for those players. So really, slope rating is, as John mentioned early on the book definition, it's the relative difficulty of a golf course for players who are not scratch players compared to others. So the scratch player doesn't really move. Slope doesn't affect them. They're a 0 everywhere they play. But everybody else can kind of go up or sometimes down if they're the slope's below 113 relative to their handicap index. If you just take that slope rating of 137 or 118, divide it by 113, you're going to get pretty much the ratio of how much the scores are expected to go up relative to the player's handicap index. So John's going to cover this in a little bit, but this is kind of the basis of what we call the course handicap. When you get your course handicap, we factor in the slope rating of the tee being played, divided by 113, and that's kind of the starting point of it. So we know that players' scores are going to be higher on courses with higher slope ratings relative to their handicap index. So that's why you see players with a 10.5 index get 12 strokes or 13 strokes on some golf courses, and that's pretty much due to slope. So just to kind of wrap up this slide with the chart, as you can see it crisscross, you probably can't see it very well, but it crosses right over at about 5.7, where those 2 numbers, those 2 lines are actually pretty consistent between 5.7 and 10.7. Though that's where those players would have about the same expected score on both courses. For the players above 10.7, the yellow line, which is broad run, is actually expected to have a higher score. And then on the players below 5.7, the green line at Bell Springs is where the players are expected to have a little bit higher score. So course rating is really more important for the low handicap players. They aren't affected as much by obstacles, especially obstacles that are kind of to the side of the hole, bunkers, trees, any short, medium crossings don't really affect a low handicap player much, but they definitely affect the mid to high handicap players, especially with crossings over, obstacles or heavily guarded greens and things like that. So that's why you can see that these scores can actually swap over or switch over from, one course being more difficult for a low end player, while the other course might be a little bit more difficult for a higher end player.
Perfect. So getting into our next question, how is slope rating used? So day in and day out through the world handicap system, slope rating is a major component. We see it in two places right off the bat: in the score differential formula that you get after each round that you posted, and in your course handicap formula to figure out your handicap when you're going out to play a round. In that score differential formula, the formula is 113 divided by the slope rating. You're then going to multiply that by your gross score, subtracted from the course rating, subtracted any PCC adjustments. So we see two examples here. Golf course A has a rating of 71.0 and a slope rating of 118. Golf course B has a course rating of 71.0, but a slope rating of 138. So you can see the math below that, and turns out to have differentials of 8.6 and 7.4. So those differentials with the same score, with the same course rating, were really derived from that slope rating there, and we can see the difference between that. Your course handicap formula there is your handicap index multiplied by slope rating divided by 113 plus the course rating minus par. Scott, is there anywhere else in the World Handicap System that slope rating comes in, or anything else we want to talk about there?
I mean, obviously these differentials are used to help determine the PCC adjustment. If players are shooting better than expected or worse than expected in great numbers, obviously we would have a PCC adjustment. But the one thing about this is that, you know, slope goes into your handicap index by going into each differential. So we also have to kind of bring it back out in the course handicap. So if this player, a player on course A, you know, they shoot an 80, course rating is 71 and the slope's 118, they get an 8.6 differential. You know, when this player goes back out to play golf with an, you know, let's say their index is 8.6, let's say they played to exactly their index. That 8.6 index would get them back to a 9 course handicap, which is exactly the number that they shot over the course rating. So they shot 80, course rating is 71, they shot 9 over. So, you know, looking at example B, this player with a higher slope rating gets a lower differential, obviously 7.4. But when you take that 7.4 and put it back into the course handicap formula, that player is also going to get the 9 strokes back, so that they play, you know, to the handicap that they shot. They shot 9 over the course rating. In both cases, we want to make sure they get the right number of strokes when they go back out to play golf. The one issue though that we see is rounding. You know, sometimes the player is 1/10 away from getting an extra stroke, or 1/10 just got a stroke by 1/10. So, you know, there's always going to be those cases where a player, you know, maybe gets slightly different number of strokes coming out of the system than going into it, but that's just purely due to rounding.
Perfect. Our next question here: how is slope rating determined? So Scott, I'm going to let you take this and run with it.
Yeah, so John, you know, mentioned it early on the book definition. It looks at the difference between the course rating and the bogey rating, and that number is multiplied by a constant. So these constants here are represented on the page. 5.381. That's actually the men's constant. For women, it's 4.24. They're multipliers essentially. So basically, 5.31, everybody asks where that comes from. It's pretty simple. It's nothing, you know, magical by any means, but 113 is what we consider the standard slope rating. Where do we get that number is another question, but essentially if you take 113 and divide it by 21, you'll get 5.381. Now, why 21? Well, 21 is what a bogey golfer better half average is above the scratch golfer's better half average, taking the 96% out of the mix. So, you know, we just looked at purely the better half average of a bogey golfer versus the better half average of a scratch golfer, and that happens to be 21 strokes. You know, so to get back to a 113 slope rating, you know, that number is 5.381 as the multiplier. Now the 113, on the other hand, where does that come from? That's an inherent number in the handicap system, and really any handicap system around the world that we looked at. 113 popped up all the time. It's essentially a all scores average ratio versus a better half average. So if you took a player, all their scores, and compared it to just their better half of those scores, the intercepts right around 2.2, I think. That ratio is 113 for pretty much any tee, any golf course. Obviously, a harder golf course, a harder set of tees will produce higher average rate scores, but it'll also produce a higher better half average. So that 113 is a pretty inherent number in the handicap system. So that was used as the standard. Now, the 4.24 is actually a women's multiplier. It's a little different than the men. First off, we rate courses for a bogey woman a little different in terms of the handicap of a bogey woman golfer is a little higher than it is for the men. But also from our research is women don't have as much spread. Women's scores don't vary as much. They don't have as much variability as the men do as their handicaps go up. So we really needed to have a different multiplier to have the 113 work for both men and women, knowing that they play golf against each other, you know, at times and sometimes all the time. So.
Awesome. And then last but not least, want to talk about the history of slope rating a little bit. Slope rating came into the system in 1987. There was testing done for many years prior. There was a need for this to add a relative difficulty component to the handicap system. And as we've talked about, it does play a key factor in the world handicap system. So Scott, what else do you want to talk about in terms of the history of slope rating?
Yeah, so that 1987 is kind of a, you know, that was where all associations in the U.S. were required to use slope, but it was actually, like it says, tested for years prior. It was used as early as the late 70s in a few states as just a testing platform. I think 82, 83 is when a couple of states adopted it just, you know, fully within their state only. So it was something that was kind of built over time. It wasn't all done, you know, in 1987. But as it says in the third bullet, the relative difficulty was the key factor here. Prior to 87 or prior to slope being introduced, you know, courses just had a course rating. And, you know, somebody who played at Pine Valley who shot 10 over the course rating was not the same player as somebody who played at a local muni at 5,600 yards that shot 10 over the course rating. Obviously, there's a number of other factors that can, you know, factor into the difficulty of a golf course relative to the player's ability. You know, a scratch golfer, you know, overcomes the obstacles fairly well. A higher handicap player doesn't. So the more obstacles there are in a golf course, typically it's going to be the more it's going to impact the slope rating, because the bogey golfer is going to have more trouble with the obstacles than the scratch. The other thing is we really needed to create a slope line. You really need 2 points. So we chose a scratch golfer and a bogey golfer. We could have chosen other players. We could have chosen a 10 and a 30. But those two seem to fit. They're very common, very recognizable terms, bogey and scratch. Players along that line, that slope line, do fit in fairly well. We've tested it. We've looked at 10 handicaps. We've looked at 30 handicaps, et cetera, and they do fit along those same slope lines as well as expected. So we feel pretty confident that just rating the course for a scratch and a bogey pretty much covers the players that are in between and above and below those two levels as well. So there was a lot of research obviously involved with this. It took 10 plus years to really bring it to the market, if you can say that. So it wasn't something, it was just somebody's thought and just went into the system. It was pretty heavily researched and tested before we did it. So.
Cool. So that's the end of our presentation. Jason, do we have any questions that people would like answered?
Yeah. Had one here. He started off with asking why 113 was the average slope, but after Scott's explanation, he followed up with a different question. Can you explain where that 113 number arises from?
Yeah, I think I covered a little bit, but just to make sure you understand. So the 113 is essentially a ratio of 1.13. We just took the decimal out. So if you look at a player's all score average versus their better half average from the same set of tees, it pretty much comes out to 113 as a ratio with a, you know, again, there's an intercept point there at the zero that we have to factor in. But that is inherent to almost any tee that you look at for a player or any course. So it's not the same everywhere. Sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower, but on average it's 113. So it's just a number that we gravitated to because it is an inherent value within the handicap system. So we use that as the standard.
Great, thanks, Scott. So a little slow on the questions rolling in here, but I do want to remind everyone you can find this recorded webinar at that website listed on your page. You can also look on gapgolf.org. Should be on one of the first couple scrolls. We will have more webinars to be announced in the future. Just keep an eye on your email as we'll be sending those out as soon as we get them scheduled. Looks like that's it for the questions section today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Scott, appreciate you taking the time out of your day to answer some of these questions that our members had.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.